ox is getting gored. But I think, this is where I'd love to see the president step up and say, folks, I don't care whether you're Republican, Democrat, young or old, every one of us, for us to get out of the problem we're in, are going to have to make a sacrifice. And it's time for you to quit thinking about you and start thinking about other people. And if we were to do that, and we had the leadership to do that, I think you could go down the road with a much more effective resolution to some of our problems with a lot less bitterness and debate. Remember, Washington's about protecting the players up here's individual interest. It's not about doing the best thing for America. And what we need is to be about doing the best thing for America and for our kids and the generations that follow. And there's a lot at risk right now, and we're in very troubled times. And it's going to require real leadership to say, I'm willing to bend some to do what we need to do.
Let's go to Albert, Republican caller in Delaware. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate Senator Coburn. I like him. I'm a black Republican, but I'm going to leave the Republican Party because I'm sick of the shenanigans that's going on, especially in Washington. And while Washington fiddles, that's Democrats and Republicans. The Chinese are moving straight ahead of us in every category: medical, transportation, research and development, and we are just fiddling away our whole system. Senator Coburn, I would like to see you run for president. Don't say anything, but I'd like to see you run for president. But I am absolutely tired of the Republican Party filibustering every piece of legislation, all these bills that are caught up in the Senate. And Republicans are filibustering everything. They are against every bit of change. And filibustering is not in the Constitution, but yet they use this filibustering action. I would like to hear what you have to say, but I appreciate you and I like you.
Well, I'm probably where most of his scorn should be directed towards the Republicans in the Senate that are holding up bills is probably should be directed towards me. I told my colleagues at the first of the Congress before the last and this one as well, if you want to create a new program, you ought to have to eliminate some program today. I mean, we can't keep growing the government. And so if they're not paid for or not offsetting, and if they're not within the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, then we don't have any business doing it. And so probably part of the difficulty really is with me rather than Republicans in general, because I'm kind of the cog, the rock that's gotten in between the gears there. Again, I think we've taken the party labels and the party identifications too far. And I think we're missing it, both Democrats and Republicans, if we don't start thinking about what the best right thing for America is. The other thing I'd comment to the caller is, as a physician, I'm trained to fix real disease. And the way physicians get in trouble and the reason they get sued is they treat symptoms instead of disease. They allow themselves to be talked into, well, this is this, and it's not really underlying disease. And what I see happening in Washington all the time is we treat symptoms because it plays well and it quiets things down. But what it does is it causes the underlying disease to smolder. And when we get down to fixing the real problem, and that's like the health care bill, we didn't fix the real problem. The problem with health care in our country is it costs too much, and $1 out of every $3 we spend on it doesn't help anybody. But we didn't address that. We addressed all these other symptoms rather than the core problem. And that's what I see Congress doing all the time. I mean, we've got a food safety bill coming up. All it does is layer on 100 and more layers of regulations onto the bureaucrats that are responsible for food safety, but doesn't fix the real problem. And the real problem is we've got agencies that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. We're just going to give them more work to do, but not have safer food. And so, I'm challenging the status quo on that. And I think we need to do more of that. We have the safest food in the country, in the world. by far. Everybody knows that. And how many more dollars can you spend to make it safer? In other words, what's the tail end of that? It's kind of like the Homeland Security. Can we be 100% Homeland Secure? No. And what's the incremental benefit for every next dollar that we spend? And we ought to be asking those questions, especially in light of the fact that we've bankrupted our children.
Senator Coburn, you mentioned that you are responsible for a fair number of the holds and not letting things go through in the Senate. What do you think about proposals to get rid of secret holds?
There's no such thing as a secret hold right now, really, because you have to, if you're holding, what there is a secret rolling hold, which would require multiple senators to do it, because after 72 hours, it's coming out anyway. But I don't have a secret hold, because every time I hold a bill, everybody knows who's holding it. And I write a letter to the people the same day. Here's the reason I'm holding your bill. What we ought to get rid of is secret passage of everything by unanimous consent. 94% of what the Senate passes, it does by unanimous consent. That means there's no debate, there's no amendment, and nobody ever hears about it in the rest of the country. It just passes, because we've said, if you don't object. And so what it does, it puts the onus. We all think we ought to do this, and by the way, we're going to do it unless you object. Well, that's all done in the dark of night. And so we ought to do it the other way. The Senate was designed, I disagree with the one caller. The Senate was designed specifically to force consensus. And until 1904, it took 99 to break a filibuster. And then it was moved to 67, and then in the mid-70s it was moved to 60. I think that was a great concept, because it would cause people to have to compromise. And we've not seen that in the past 2 years because of the predominance of one party over the other. We've just run it.
Let's get John in on the discussion in St. Louis, Missouri, an independent caller. Hi, John.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking my call. I certainly enjoy C-SPAN, what it does for the American people by getting all these ideas out. I'd like to make a comment about the Republican stewardship over our fiscal policy. I think it's been pathetic. Actually, it is not since Eisenhower has a Republican administration had a balanced budget, yet these Republicans say that they are best at guiding us on the fiscal trail. I think that's laughable.
Well, I think you have to look at history, and I think he's got legitimate criticism of Republicans. And you know, the Republicans won in the House in the last election not because people were voting for them, as they were voting against what was there, and so they're on probation. And so, you know, if you really want fiscal discipline, it's going to require making tough votes, which means a lot of those Republicans who make those tough votes are going to lose their seats because they made the right vote. And that's what we ought to be about. So I think it's legitimate to criticize Republicans' fiscal actions. But the question of where do you find, there's very few people up here that don't have a bias to grow the government, Republican or Democrat. And, you know, I stop just as many Republican bills as I do Democrat bills. And the bias is to grow the government. And you know, that wasn't what our founders intended. That's not what we can afford today, and it's not what we ought to be about.
Senator Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Glad to be with you. Enjoyed it.
Coming up next, we'll talk about the House Democratic leadership elections with Representative Blumenauer. We'll be right back. First, news update from C-SPAN Radio.
It's 8:28 a.m. Eastern Time. The first post-election meeting between the president and congressional leaders